Right, it's 3 o'clock, so good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, Your Two Choices When Implementing SD-WAN. My name's Sam Cobley. I'm the Marketing Manager at Open Reality, and I'll be your host today. Thanks very much for joining us. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd just like to remind you that the attendees are in listen-only mode. So if you do have a question at any point today, please put it in the questions box and we'll answer it as we go or at the end. We also are recording the session today, and you will be sent a copy of the recording following the webinar for you to watch back at a later time and share with any colleagues. So if we quickly go to the next slide, we'll go through our agenda and make a few introductions. So as I said, my name's Sam. I'm the Marketing Manager at Open Reality. I've also got Duncan Little, the Managing Director of Open Reality, on the call. Hello, Duncan.
Hello. Yes, sorry. Hello, I was muted.
And we're also joined by Nick Johnson, who's Managing Director of Evolving Networks, and Nick Elliott, who's the CTO at Evolving Networks. Hello to Nick and Nick.
Afternoon.
Thank you very much for taking your time out and joining us today. Okay.
No problem.
So we've got our introductions done. So shortly, Duncan and Nick are going to give you a really quick background to Open Reality and to Evolving Networks and why we've decided to partner together to bring this SD-WAN solution to the market. We're then going to talk about exactly what SD-WAN is. There's a lot of misconceptions about what SD-WAN is, so hopefully we'll give you a bit of a rundown of that. We're also going to talk about common business and operational WAN challenges and the goals that many organizations have when they're looking at SD-WAN. We're also going to talk about the fundamental two choices you have when implementing SD-WAN. We'll talk a little bit then about the service that Evolving Networks offer, and we're also going to talk about what they've seen since the lockdown has come in place in the UK. So a bit about the coronavirus effect as well, keeping it topical. Okay, so over to Duncan, who's going to give you a bit of a background into Open Reality.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. It's a very well attended webinar today. We're joined by many customers. So from Open Reality and our sister company, BrightCloud, thank you all very much for sparing the time. For many years, Open Reality has worked with customers to improve performance of your applications across both local and wide area networks. And we have a long record of really excellent success and built up a massive amount of experience in doing this. And as you will know, we employ a variety of different tools and technologies. And in fact, BrightCloud, we deliver so many services from our data center, and we have for some time been looking at how we can improve our own network and also considering how we can help you, our customers, for products and other services with your own SD-WAN. We started evaluating a number of different technologies, none of which were perfect or complete, and then we discovered Evolving Networks. And I'm very happy that we have developed this new partnership. Very excited about how this will help our customers address the current and future challenges that you have. I should probably throw into the mix at this point that with the current situation, we're also delivering a lot of virtual desktop infrastructure projects. Customers have migrated to working from home, obviously, and we've certainly been delivering a lot of systems and expanding systems and solutions using Citrix. So just in case, that's not on the PowerPoint, I don't think, but just in case that's relevant, I thought I'd let you know. So I'm joined today, as well as you've just been explained, by Nick from Evolving Networks. And over to you, Nick, maybe just to introduce yourself and jump in with a brief intro.
Sure, thanks, Duncan. I should say there are two Nicks, just to make things easy for everybody. There are two Nicks from Evolving Networks. There's myself, Nick Johnson, CEO. We also have Nick Elliott, who is our Chief Technical Officer. And he's certainly here to assist me with any complicated questions that might happen at the end, but he'll jump in as we go as well. But I'll give you a very brief background about Evolving Networks. We are 12 years old, formed in 2008. We are UK-based company. All all our staff, all our support and dev and engineering resources is UK based. We, in terms of scale, we are 500 plus customers and growing. We are privately owned, we're debt free and cash generative and all those good things. But in terms of what we're about, there was one sort of single founding tenet of Evolving Networks, and that was about the application of software to connectivity, specifically network virtualization. How can we develop network virtualization software and then deliver that to businesses in a way that gives them more resilience, more intelligence, more agility when it comes to their connectivity, but also increasingly to wide area networking. And that's what has driven us throughout the last decade and more. We will come on to this in more detail as we go, but broadly we have three distinct yet parallel and complementary lines of development, and they are software, network, and monitoring. We write our own software, we deliver it over our own network, we have our own monitoring, and importantly, AI and feedback and orchestration mechanism. Now that puts us in a very unusual situation in that we're a software company. We write the software and we deliver it as a managed service. And again, we'll talk as we go on about the position that puts us in and some of the benefits of that. But suffice to say, when SD-WAN started gaining traction as a term some sort of four years ago maybe, we certainly felt that there was a case there of the industry and business maybe catching up with what we were already doing. The idea that there is something out there that is more fleet of foot than MPLS, more scalable, more intelligent, and that you don't have to forego anything in terms of quality if you don't want to go down that route. And maybe just to echo the point that Duncan was making there with regards to the situation that the UK, the world is in right now, certainly we're seeing that people are looking at how can we make this wide area network more flexible right now? How can we add a degree of intelligence to support home working or remote working or whatever? So that's what we are. We're a UK-based software company that delivers SD-WAN as a service.
Thanks, Nick. And you're right. We're seeing a lot more interest in people rolling out new solutions and changing working practices at the moment, which we'll also talk about in a little while. So, a couple of background slides introducing the concept of software-defined wide area network. Firstly, I think we can say there is no recognized standard for this. However, Gartner have produced some insight, which we'll spend a couple of slides on. Simply put, we want to separate the logical management and operation of the network from the physical infrastructure. And Gartner predicts that in one way or another, 90% of organizations will be doing this over the next 3 years, either through virtualized services from their provider or by purchasing software appliances, doing it themselves. So while there is no firm definition, we do have 4 criteria to help us understand where we're going. Those criteria are that software-defined networks should have multiple connection types, the ability to aggregate traffic and improve the throughput and resilience. Dynamically select how traffic uses the links, the paths, and provide a simple, easy, single management instance to be able to change and adapt with business requirements. And finally, 4th guideline is that we want to be able to support third-party tools for security and other purposes. Hold on a sec, there we go. And Gartner have given us something which, if you're not familiar with, the hype cycle. I tend to take these things with a pinch of salt myself, but it's a useful indicator of where we are in the adoption of the technology. And what we see here is that it's now ready to be adopted. More enterprises are scheduling projects and pilots of SD-WAN technology. And what can I say? When we're talking to our customers, when I'm talking to them, they are all looking at adopting some form of SD-WAN, hence the popularity, I think, of this webinar. Given the current imperative for remote working as well, I can only see that this particular hype cycle is going to accelerate. So with that in mind, what are the challenges today that we want to be able to address in the future with this new approach to wide area network? So challenges: MPLS is expensive and it's cumbersome. Users demand better and more consistent experience to a growing number of applications, and therefore application performance is essential. Many organizations and many of you on this webinar today are suffering from complexity in the branch and carrying with you a lot of technical debt, which we need to get rid of to simplify our lives and reduce our costs. Additionally, the old static design of the network is cumbersome. We need to be more agile and change with the demands of the business. Are we wasting money on duplicating links? We've seen this quite a lot, where you've bought two links, one's passive, one's active. Wouldn't it be great if you could use them both in an active way? And perhaps the biggest challenge is to be able to administer and manage the performance you're getting. We're often dependent on a single services provider at the core, and we have complex and inconsistent core routing. So how do you ensure that you are getting the best performance when you deploy technology as a solution? In terms of challenges, Nick, would you agree these are the sort of the ideal list?
I don't know if there's an ideal list. What we see is that there are a number of different things that drive people to adopt this technology, and it really depends on where you're at as an organization and where you want to get to. We see people either working their way up to SD-WAN, up in quotes, because what they've got is something that they're a developing business, they're growing, they need to move to, I don't know whether it's voice or video conferencing, or they want to go and roll out Citrix and remote working throughout their network, or they're coming at it from another direction, whereas they're looking to make the cost saving leap down from an MPLS. Increasingly, what we have developed here is a very flexible offering that can enable people to meet whatever their requirements are. Certainly everything on that list, and maybe more besides.
Yeah, so what that leads us into is, if we say those are the main challenges, then let's find out what the business is telling us in terms of business requirements. Now, we put these slides together about 6-7 weeks ago, so maybe the requirements have changed in order, but certainly it was at the time reduce cost and reduce management time. Business always wants us to reduce cost, but at the same time, increase performance. So get more performance, increase visibility and control. We are becoming much more dependent today than ever before on this network, so we need to improve resilience. And we get that more and more organizations have got disparate applications delivered by cloud. So can we have some form of cloud optimized network, potentially doing away with some expensive technologies such as ExpressRoute. Finally, I think we need to be flexible. Business wants a flexible network to be able to adapt and address new challenges. So what are the primary goals of SD-WAN? This leads us to a conclusion that says we need to generate immediate, ongoing and significant cost savings. So cost saving is top of the list, and anybody currently today with an MPLS network will be able to achieve that. Most organizations are driving for an internet first approach. We need to improve connectivity between locations, between offices, and in fact now between homes. Want to increase the network flexibility and the agility of business to adapt to challenges and changes. Reduce and simplify the management and therefore reduce costs again. And we want to be able to guarantee and improve application performance. And finally, we want to make it easier to deliver different services and provide the coexistence of devices and connections. That brings us then to the big choice we have to make. And at this point, I have to say that we at Open Reality BrightCloud initially decided to create our own network to be able to join our own customers to our own cloud services. And we wanted to achieve pretty much everything that we've just said in terms of addressing challenges and business goals. So I genuinely speak from personal experience when I say that we originally considered taking the red pill and building it ourselves. And the thing that we learned is that it isn't that simple a decision. It's not a simple decision to work out which particular brand of technology we want to go with. There's much more to it than that, and we started getting more deeply into aspects of the business we didn't really want to. We're talking, then we're starting to talk to different service providers on how we can aggregate and merge different cores, how to access the network so that we can guarantee and understand that we're getting good core performance, and how to be able to get good information on what's happening inside so that we can diagnose and resolve issues and provide visibility to our customers. Because historically, we have had pretty poor service from ISPs and their support teams. Anyway, to build our own SD-WAN turned out to be a big project, and we didn't really want to get into it. We start with trying to pick a vendor of SD-WAN technology and trying to cut through, what their marketing says versus what they actually deliver. Then would we really want to sign up with different ISPs? So we'd have to ask our customers potentially to sign up with 2 different service providers with 2 different contracts. And again, do you actually trust them? Choosing more than one connectivity type for all sites, so lease lines, ADSL, FTTP, we need to be able to deal with and offer all of those. And of course, picking the appropriate management technology. And actually for us, this is quite easy because this is a core skill in Open Reality. However, I put this slide in with a number of different competitive products on, just to indicate the number of choices you have when you go out into the world to evaluate management tools and processes to keep an eye on which suppliers you've chosen. And of course, the other thing, which at the time I was kind of unaware of, is to think about the quality of the core network in the UK as opposed to other parts of the world. And this is relevant when you're choosing a product to invest in. It's most likely that the product was originally designed to work with a very different network. Well, I think you've got comments on this, Nick, so do you want to just chip in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, briefly, SD-WAN, as people in the UK market are familiar with, is a concept that is being driven from the west coast of America. The majority of the software has been developed over there, and it's a very different marketplace. It's geographically different, it's politically different. The regulation that governs it is different. The example I always use, and this is based on being out there and talking to businesses, is a business in America would expect, if it were looking to make the transition from leased lines to SD-WAN and therefore from expensive T1 type Ethernet to broadband, they would be expecting to spend about $100 a month on a broadband service, and that would give them 30, 40, 50 meg download and typically 10 to 20 meg upload. But that would be an entirely different product to what businesses in the UK might be prepared to spend 14, 15, 10 pounds on. It will be low latency, it'll be low jitter, it will have very low contention ratios, but it'll also fail in a different way to broadband in the UK. Parts of our infrastructure are 100 years old. Central London has got relatively poor broadband, and that's just the nature of the beast. It's the complexity of getting decent fiber optic cables to every building. So it's a different product. It acts in a different way, and certainly there is an issue if you are trying to take software that is has been built with that kind of an infrastructure, with a kind of infrastructure that is native to the US. If that's what the software developers know and are used to, that's what they write software for. If you bring that software over to the UK and try and stick it on top of UK infrastructure, then you're going to have some problems.
Yeah, and that actually was one of our worries when we were trying to work on designing it ourselves, because buying kit off the shelf and expecting it to work, we were kind of worried at our risk really in doing that. And that really brought us round to that manner of thinking, which was, why make life hard? Why reinvent the wheel when somebody's already spent a lot of time building an SD-WAN service? It makes the decision much easier. It's much more of a purchasing decision, balancing the risk, cost, resilience, and performance. And however, there are plenty of offerings that make claims. And so really thinking about how to evaluate a service, we came up with a list of our questions, which I'll share with you here. How long has it been around? Is it truly tested? Is it resilient at every level? So are we talking about multiple core carriers? Do we have confidence that we've got visibility and we're dealing with honest people that can look at and prove the performance that we're getting? True aggregation, this is very interesting. A lot of people are claiming aggregation, but are they actually getting true aggregation between multiple connections? Optimization of mission critical traffic, so cloud, voice obviously need to be optimized. And really the other thing I found when we were looking at this is there are some SD-WAN services that are aimed at global enterprises, multiple data centers splattered all over the world. Do you really want to pay for that when actually you only want a UK-based solution? And I think it's at that point we decided to start working with evolving networks. And now I'd really like to hand over to Nick just to talk a little bit more about evolving networks, and then we'll move on to a quick demo. So Nick, over to you. Sure,
thanks, Duncan. So this is really where I want to build on what I mentioned in the intro that I gave there. We started this business, as I said, with the idea of taking network virtualization software and delivering that as a managed service to businesses to deliver the benefits of resilience and intelligence and agility to businesses. Starting in that way and making that unusual decision to both develop the software and deliver it as a managed service was really important to us for the reasons that I mentioned previously. You've got to understand the underlay, otherwise there will be a disconnection between the software and the connectivity that it's sitting on. In fact, the slide that Duncan's just moved on to now.
Sorry.
That's not a problem. Well, okay. Happy to stay there.
Yeah, come on.
This is, and I suppose it's an important point actually that this. What this does is this gives you a graphical representation of a connection. Now, this could be a single internet connection for one business, or it could be an SD-WAN replacing a 100-site MPLS. Architecturally, there's nothing different in what we do. So what we've got here is a representation of how an EVX, now that is our device, if we work sort of bottom to top on this slide here, the EVX is our device. That's what sits on a customer site. Every Evolving Networks customer has an EVX device in their office, and you plug a firewall, or we supply a firewall, but importantly, there is one port on one device with a static IP range on it. That is your internet connection. Now that EVX will encapsulate data and send it out to the internet via the planes that you see on that slide there. And if we work our way up, starting at the transport and access plane, we will never supply an EVX to a customer with just one tail running into it, whether that is a 1 gigabit lease line or a 2 meg ADSL line. We have a a real a point of principle when it comes to resilience at every level, and that starts with the number of physical tails that you're plugging into your device. Now, we will deliver multiple FTTC lines, multiple ADSL lines, multiple FTTP lines, multiple lease lines, or a resilient mix of different types of technology. And we like to have a conversation with every customer about what their risk profile is. Importantly, I should say, there's only one EVX on that slide. You absolutely have the option of a high availability pair of EVX devices so that we can have resilience at the CPE level as well. But the risk of having multiple tails develop a fault at the same time clearly is lower than the risk of having a fault develop on any one tail. Similarly, if you mix and match your connectivity, if you have an FTTC line and an FTTP line and a lease line, the risk is mitigated further. So we will have a look at what is available in any given location and have a conversation with a customer about what's available. Do you want to spend the money on a lease line? Are you happy to go with multiple FTTCs and or FTTP? So that's the transport and access plane there. That's the physical connectivity locally to your office. Going up to the multi-VNO plane, this is really key for us. Given that we will not supply an EVX with only one connectivity tail into it, we will always supply a connection that is resilient at that level, but also resilient at the carrier level. We've built our network on the back of numerous ISP networks, and we're very careful about the way that we do that. Nick Elliott, CTO, and his team have a very robust process that they go through when we bring a new carrier partner on board to make sure that we're not sharing infrastructure, or they're not sharing infrastructure. There's no overlaps in terms of our carrier partners and their footprints. We don't want, if there is a fault in the floor of Telehouse North or Sovereign House goes down, we don't want multiple ISPs that we're routing our traffic through to both suffer fault at the same time. We want to ensure, and we do, that every customer, as well as being resilient, through the tails up to their exchange, they are then routed onto different carrier networks through different infrastructure, different IP transits, so that with again, the risk of a failure at that multi-VNO plane is massively reduced. We have seen it. We have lost entire carrier partners, and none of our customers have gone offline. Customers will lose a degree of connectivity in terms of outright throughput, but nobody will lose connectivity. And importantly then, in terms of the routing plane, that EVX on the customer site is establishing that software overlay via a mothership device that is located in one of our data centers. Now, primarily they will be Maidenhead, Nottingham, London, and Manchester. I think, in fact, we've got another one or two since this diagram was drafted up. But that EVX, again, we are resilient at that point. If one of our data centers were to suffer a catastrophic failure, then pretty seamlessly, I think it's a matter of a second or two, all of the data that is routed through, for argument's sake, Maidenhead, will be distributed across Nottingham, London, and Manchester. And we ensure that our load on any given data center is such that it could be absorbed by our other data centers without them even going past 50% in terms of their capacity. So that is that diagram there just encompasses, as I said, either one internet connection to one site, or that routing multiplied 50, 100, 200 times into your classic SD-WAN, the type of thing that you might replace an MPLS with. So I don't know where everyone wants to go from now, Duncan.
Thanks, Nick. So just talking about some of the features really that we get from evolving networks. I think particularly something that interested me was the way that you guys aggregate links versus the way that some of the other solution providers do that.
Sure.
Maybe talk us through a couple of these.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, link aggregation is the first one there, and it is vital. And this comes back down to a decision that that the other Nick Elliott, our CTO, took at day one, and that was to go down a true aggregation route rather than just making routing decisions based on application. So we've been doing that, as I said, from day one for more than a decade. We will take multiple types of connectivity, whether it is multiple ADSL lines, FTTC, lease lines, or a mix of multiple different types of connectivity, and our EVX will turn that into one aggregated whole. Even if you scale this right up to multiple gigabit lease lines, we will not make policy-based routing decisions on what I've got here is I've got a bunch of email traffic, I've got a bunch of web traffic, I've got some VoIP traffic. The EVX is not going to make a decision to send that traffic down link A and the other type of traffic down link B. We will turn it all into one homogeneous aggregated internet connection, and then we will apply QoS rules to it to make sure that the data gets where it's got to go in the right kind of shape. And that's important. I mean, coming back to you mentioned at the start, Duncan, this idea of active passive. One of the things we're doing quite a lot of right now is taking active passive lease lines where someone's made a purchasing decision and they've made it with the right intention. I want to make sure my business stays online. I'm going to buy a 100 meg lease line. I'm going to buy another 100 meg lease line. I'm going to use one until it fails, and then I'm going to use the other one. And we're saying, well, that's great. But what you've got to do is manage the transition from one to the other at the point where you need it most, where that lease line that you've been using for the last 4 years suddenly stops working. You've got to hope that your secondary, that your backup is working at that point, but you've got to manage that transition as well. And of course, what you've been doing for the last 4 years until the time that your primary link fails is you've been paying for 2 lease lines and only ever actually using one of them. So if you move to an aggregation model there, we can actually take that active line and that passive line, run off software over them, and turn them into one internet connection that is twice the size of what you were using before. And that's how we have always approached this. So it is a fairly fundamental difference with obviously what we're now competing against, which is your SD-WAN that's coming out typically from the west coast of America, where they are making policy-based routing decisions for the most part. They are saying, right, let me have a look at these lines. I've got a leased line, I've got a 4G, I've got a broadband connection. I'm looking at the traffic, and I'm making a decision here that I'm going to put the majority of my traffic down the broadband link, because I'm going to save my VoIP traffic, and I'm going to send that down the lowest latency link there, which is the leased line, and I might use my 4G for something else. We're not doing that. We are making sure that we maintain the quality of the connectivity across all of those links, turn them into one aggregated whole, then apply QoS rules to make sure that your voice gets there and is outranking your bulk data transfer. But importantly, by doing it that way, you get to use the aggregated total of all that bandwidth all of the time. So that's the fundamental difference with our approach to SD-WAN is with link aggregation versus the making an application-based decision on a policy-based routing type setup.
Yeah, that's been very impressive that we have seen that. And when you combine that with the bandwidth acceleration QoS, you really do get excellent, efficient performance, utilizing all of the available network at every site. So with those sort of features and benefits there, when you add it all up, and when you're buying that as a service, for us, it seemed a no-brainer to build rather a partnership with Evolving Networks. So I think with that in mind, are we going to move on to take a quick look at the kind of telemetry and management tools and bring in Nick Elliott at this point?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Duncan. And I just take control. There we go. Okay, so What I'm going to show you here is a login with some, this isn't demo data specifically, this is a demo login, but this is actually anonymized customer data. So this is real, and I'm going to show you live connections being used right now and them update in real time. This dashboard that you're looking at right now is what a customer will see when they log into eView Live, our network management tool. Now, this data is coming from all over our network. It's coming from each EVX, it's coming from the individual modems, and it's coming from inside and outside our network as well. Our monitoring platform has always been built outside of our actual connectivity platform. And in fact, in the last year, we've moved it to a full multi-cloud setup, so we can even lose entire cloud providers and still maintain our monitoring. Because it's very important that you know when something is up or down and what its throughput is and other health metrics as well. And so this dashboard here gives you a nice broad overview of all the connections that you have. What we've got in here are just 3 individual connections. So if you had an SD-WAN of 50, that would say 50 in the top left corner there. But what we're showing is the total number of links that we have is 11. And so those are spread across those other 3 connections. If one of those links were to go offline for any reason, then actually you'd see on this screen right now that second circle of links would get affected, and you'd see a proportion there going offline. Now, what we have in our NOC, and obviously what customers can have as well on a big screen, is their aggregated data. And so in fact, if I click on overview on the left here, we've got a version of this that they will then be able to use on a full screen in case they want to see exactly what's going on and react quickly to changes. There's also, as you can see here, we're listing the top downloaders and top uploaders. Even though we provide a completely unmetered service, we're also showing here how much download and upload traffic there has been as well. There's also one other dashboard which I'll show here. This has all come through development in the last couple of months. A live throughput graph again of the entire of your entire network. So in this case, these 3 sites. Now again, we have aggregate data for our entire customer base, but what this is showing here is if you had these 3 particular sites, this would be the total amount of your throughput in terms of download and upload, and that's live. As you can see, the graph is continually updating every 10 seconds. And an important point to note here is that what we're actually seeing as a result of the pandemic response and the changing of people's behaviors is that upload traffic at offices is going up in a major way. You know, we certainly have offices that are running off our network at the moment that are passing absolutely no traffic at all, where people have completely shut down, and obviously that's the restaurant and retail sides of the market. But increasingly what we're seeing is upload traffic across our network more than doubling. And what that is, as you can see here on this particular graph, the orange line is trending above the blue line. That's as a result of more people working from home, but still having to access systems in the office. And that's a trend we're obviously seeing at the moment. So not only is resilience important for that office because you've got everyone there accessing it, but again, one of our biggest increases in deals over the last month has been on upgrading the upload bandwidth on head offices where applications still reside. So if I go back again to the home page here, and let's go into our list of connections now. We've just picked 3 connections here. The data is anonymized, but it is live. So you would see here the actual names and addresses of the sites that you have. If it gets above a certain number, then it changes to more of a list view for those larger SD-WANs. Otherwise, you do a lot of scrolling. One thing I'll point out is this site is entirely responsive. So this works absolutely fine on your mobile phone. And changes width gracefully, so you can actually see all this information at all one time. What you can see here is a general connection status of online for each of these 3 sites, but then you can jump into more specific detail. So if I jump into site number 2, on here, what we can see here is a 2-line solution with FTTP and an FTTC service. Because we are providing that broadband, we've got a managed modem on the end of it. We can see the sync data that's coming live from that modem as well. Obviously, we don't get the same information for an FTTP or a lease line, but any of the broadband that we've got, we get that data. Obviously, things like telephone numbers here have been anonymized. What you can see here is a live graph for the last 10 or 15 minutes, continuing to scroll, showing the live data. If I click on recent, then that will actually load the last 3 hours, again at 10-second slices. It's really useful diagnostically to see what happened and when on a connection. You can see here there was a sustained upload, this orange line here, at this particular time. And you can scroll further backwards and you can see the data loading up instantaneously to show you that going back as far as a 24-hour period at that resolution. And then if I click on history, then what we have is a per hour view of the amount downloaded and uploaded. And again, we've got this in 2 different ways. You can do this by day, in which case you see it per hour. And if I click on the week view, then I get it per day. And again, it's interesting to note there's quite a parity here of upload and download. If we look back at the previous week, then we'll see again, you know, depending on the type of business, you tend to see a Monday to Friday split, or you know, depending on if these places are open at the weekend, you'll see their traffic usage change accordingly. What we're looking at on here, if I go back, so here we are, Monday 30th of March. Then I go back the week before. Look at this change. For 16th of March, week beginning the 16th of March. This is before the lockdown, and you can see this business here was way more of a download user than it was an upload user. And as soon as we get to the lockdown week, that starts to fall, and then it's replaced by upload being the larger share of what's used on the connection. And so that's just another important observation just about what we're actually seeing with customer data at the moment. If I then have a look at site number 3 here, here's an example of a connection with 5 different FTTC circuits. You can see here there's no sync data for number 4. That's actually one of the older lines we've got still with one of the old BT white modems on the end of it. As all of the others here are delivering telemetry because we've got our own managed modem on the end of it. You can see there are slightly differing sync rates for each one, but we're aggregating all of that throughput on both the upload and the download. Here again, a classic example of a user that is using way more upload at the moment than download. Again, if I click on recent, you'll be able to see it's a fairly consistent orange line here showing that data. Now, what we've decided here is to show things in as clear a way as possible, to give summaries, to give aggregate information. There's an awful lot of data that is sat behind here that can be used by customers, but we tend to deal with that on an on-demand basis. Because we develop this software and because we develop the SD-WAN software ourselves, we can develop a feed of basically whatever telemetry we like for a customer if they want to display or look at any of that data. We also use it to help customers make purchasing decisions as well. If they see that certain links are being saturated, the overall connection needs more bandwidth, this data is very, very valuable there as well. But because this is a managed service, this doesn't give you every single bit of fine-grained detail, because what we found when we give that is actually it's not what people want to see. They want the comfort of knowing that this system is looking after their connectivity, and they want the ability to see it live just like we do. But actually, if you give too much information, then that actually is counterproductive to what they want out of a fully managed service.
Nick,
so I think that's me done.
I think that's a really good overview, and what's very interesting about that is the way that you can produce specific reports if customers require it. I'm just trying to show my screen now. There we go. Show my screen. So actually, the bottom line here is that if you consider the business goals and the requirements that we have for SD-WAN, what Evolving Networks is able to do is achieve those goals, but without the pain and hassle that you would have if you had to evaluate your own tooling, consider how you're going to support and monitor that, and all the other complicated things that are just going to sap your time. It's much easier to buy this in as a service, which is the reason we've partnered with the Evolving Networks. Well engineered, healthy network, great performance, zero risk. And I think that kind of finishes it off really with just a thank you and to ask if we have any questions. Sam, have we had any questions come in?
Yeah, we do. So somebody's asking about what you can do for home users. Can they get a solution that works from their home?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's we have seen quite an uptick in that kind of business over the last few weeks. But yeah, we can supply an EVX device and connectivity to home users. We have a spectrum of users, all the way from, as I mentioned earlier, people with multiple gigabit connections in very large offices, right the way down to home users, people running a business from home, or business people dialing into their accessing their corporate SD-WAN from home. So for our perspective, we can deliver an EVX device that will hook into your existing broadband at home. We can supply broadband for home users, and we can set that up in a way that either gives you high quality internet access with QoS, or indeed enables you to access your corporate wide area network via an SD-WAN. So yeah, from our perspective, absolutely, home users we support.
I better get my order in for that today, actually. Any other questions, Sam?
I've got a question. What's the level of SLA offered on the EVX devices? Is there a maximum throughput that can be supported?
Well, I might hand over to Nick shortly to talk about throughput, but in terms of SLA, we have a couple of different levels of SLA, and I alluded earlier to having a discussion about risk with customers. We can make any given connection as resilient as you like. There just does tend to come a point where people don't want to pay for it, and I'm being quite serious in terms of we can guarantee that you won't go offline if you let us put huge amounts of connectivity into one office and strap up multiple EVXs and various other devices. There comes a point where people have to make a business decision about how much risk they want to take on. But typically, we will give you a standard or an enhanced SLA, and we will move from the standard to the enhanced if a customer wants to take a resilient mix of connectivity. So it may well be that we can deliver your outright bandwidth requirements with 2 FTTCs, for argument's sake. But if we put 2 FTTCs and a couple of ADSL lines in, and maybe with a 4G router in there as well, then we will enhance the SLA on that. And that SLA will either be, I think from memory, a 3 or a 5 nines uptime guarantee. But again, there is also an SLA specific to the hardware, and the SLA that we'll offer on the hardware, again, that will increase if a customer wants to go for a high availability pair of EVXs. It may well be that a high availability pair of EVXs is too expensive for your requirements. In that case, we will offer a hot swap option, which will be cheaper, but again, gives you the ability to stay online via cabling in a new EVX in the unlikely event that you have a dead piece of hardware. So we give very robust and very simple SLAs, but they are dependent upon the resilience of in terms of the mix of connectivity and EVXs that a customer is prepared to pay for on site. In terms of throughput, I'll chuck this one over to you, Nick.
Yeah, so there's nothing specifically to worry about when a customer is deciding what mix of connectivity they have at any particular site, because we have a range of different appliances that we will ship out depending on the connectivity mix that somebody chooses, and that is a feature not just of the number of ports that might be needed on there, but also the outright horsepower, if you like, of those devices. We've got very small fanless desktop units that will cope with maybe a few FTTPs or FTTCs, or even a couple of smallish lease lines, right up to full rack mount devices that can cope with the multi-gigabit connectivity. In terms of a ceiling on this, so far in the wild, we've got about a 2.5 gig on a single connection. In the lab, we're on the other side of 4 gig and rising, because all we see is demand just growing, and every time we've seen some kind of threshold, we've breached it. So right now in the lab, we're working on what will ultimately become something that gets to the other side of 10 gig, and that might be something people find surprising right now, but it's the kind of technology that one day will be, probably quite normal, in the same way that now somebody considering a gigabit service, or actually a gigabit on a 10 gig bearer maybe, wouldn't have considered 5 years ago. So as far as we're concerned, these aren't even particularly software hurdles. They're more about actually getting enough horsepower on an appliance, and again, a customer has to be willing to pay for that. To pay for those appliances in order to achieve it. But so far, any bandwidth problems we've managed to bat away.
Okay, thanks
Thank you.
guys. That was interesting. So we can do a HA pair, which I think was actually where the question was coming from. So high availability of hardware. So very good. Sorry, Sam, any other questions?
Yeah, another one from Nick Elliott, I think. How are you handling SIP and RTP sessions? Does this mean you're having to duplicate the audio stream? This is regarding load balancing.
Right. Okay. So this is being done at the packet level, and so as Nick Johnson described earlier, this aggregation is where transparently to both the end user's LAN and the internet and any internet-based services, the stream of data is being split up at the packet level and sent across all of the links that are available. We're working on at the moment, actually, in the lab, taking that data and duplicating it when it is a VoIP service, in order to create a level of parity or forward error correction or something like that. But in terms of the actual interruption to service, if an individual link were to suffer packet loss or to go down entirely, the reaction times are unnoticeable on a VoIP call. We're talking about couple of 100 milliseconds, if that, for the reaction time if a link develops a fault. And so I could have suffered a fault even during this webinar and you wouldn't have actually noticed, because it's that quick. So there are technologies, again, that we're looking to in terms of broadcasting traffic across multiple links at the moment in order to create something that is about as bulletproof and Rolls-Royce as you could get, but that's not really because there's a demand for it. That's more because I just like a challenge.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Does the aggregation of the links have any adverse effect on latency or jitter?
Yeah, that's a good question. It can depend on the latency and jitter of underlying services, which is why, again, we like to provide all of the underlying connectivity itself as part of this, because then the buck stops here. We're doing this as a turnkey solution, and if there is a circuit that is developing problems, we can act very quickly, not only to stop it from being used in the connection, but also we can actually deal with that fault to its resolution. Yes, there are going to be considerations that you have to make if you do want to aggregate very low latency and very high latency services together. There may be decisions to be made there about whether or not you really do want to aggregate all of that, or whether you want to leave the high latency services to be a last gasp failover with still the same split-second reaction times. But in terms of, in quotes, normal connectivity in the UK, it's not really an issue, where, because of the QoS that we're putting in end-to-end, and it's important to note that is bi-directional QoS, that is zero touch, so you're not having to tag your own packets on your own LAN or your own firewall in order to present them to us. Because we've got those queuing mechanisms in place, we're able to smooth things out and improve the quality of the connection, such that those considerations generally don't take an impact.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple minutes left, so 2 more quick questions. I think that'll just about do us. So can you install your solution over existing lines if you've still got a couple of years left, or some time left on existing contracts? How does that work?
Certainly we can do that. It's one of the great benefits, as Nick was just saying, of us doing both, of us writing the software, delivering it as a managed service and running it over our network, is that there is no disconnect between the two. A lot of ISPs networks aren't really built to have SD-WAN sat on top of it. Certainly not from when you're managing an ISP network as a whole. So that's where we really win. Our software has been designed and built from the ground up to sit on top of our network, and there's definite advantages to that. Having said that, we absolutely can ship an EVX out and run our software over existing connectivity, and the times that we do that and it really comes into its own is when you're effecting a migration. So classically, if you've got an MPLS setup of, I don't know, 20, 50 sites, you'll sign the dotted line for that, and then those lease lines will go live across a period of, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months. There might be a straggler that takes a year to get installed. So when you come to exiting that contract, that can be a real barrier. You end up having to hold your nose, make a jump, switch to a new solution, and you start paying for that from whatever day one, but you've got to pay for lease lines across X number of sites for however many months. So that's a real benefit to our solution, is that we can affect that transition by sending EVXs out to every site, and then you make that transition at a network level, because this is a software solution. We take control of the network, and then it's a very simple process. When the new lease lines or FTDCs or whatever it is get installed locally, you just unplug the legacy lease line and plug your new connectivity in. So we can effect a very seamless migration that way, and also minimize that painful double paying bit, which tends to be sort of an unpleasant byproduct of switching from one provider to another.
If I can just add to that, just to very briefly go through the concept of a network software overlay again, because I think it can be important to visualize, and that is that we are creating the topology of the network, even if that is just accessing the internet, but that can just as easily be accessing other sites, accessing things that are hosted in a data center, accessing things in a cloud service, or any combination of those. It can be a mixture of layer 2, it can be a mixture of layer 2 and layer 3, you can be announcing your own VLANs. This is network virtualization software. So anything above that software overlay, that's your topology. How we then change the network underlay, this is the physical circuits. We can change those circuits whenever we like without affecting the overlay and without affecting the overall topology. And likewise, we can leave the underlying circuits as they are and change the network topology on the fly. And this is the great power I see Not just that you can use multiple links and you can affect QoS and everything like that as part of SD-WAN, but you have this level of control over the topology of a network, which you didn't before, because the topology of previous networks, current networks, traditional networks, is such that the physical is bound with the topology of your underlying circuits. And installing a network overlay over the top of them allowed you to therefore make a switch to using your new topology, which can change whenever you choose, and you can also then change the underlying circuits whenever you choose without affecting that topology.
Okay, one final question. We'll have to try and get a quick answer on this. Can you do local breakouts?
Yes.
Thank you. That's very quick.
Yes,
okay.
You can. Right. On that note, I think we need to finish, Sam. Yeah.
Yeah. So as it says on the screen, if you'd like to book a follow-up session to explore how SD-WAN can help your organization, then obviously please contact us. We can get an Open Reality account manager together with one of the team from Evolving Networks to go through that. Alternatively, you can send me an email directly at the email on screen. We'll be sending the recording of this session around shortly, so feel free to rewatch any important bits and share that with colleagues. And just thank you for your questions and thank you for your time. And then finally, thank you to our panelists today for an excellent session.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Stay safe and stay at home.
Thanks. Bye.